Welcome back to another edition of the Real Spiritual Talk podcast. I am your host, Lamont Gates, and today my guest had a near death experience and felt what he described as the presence of God. Joining us today, ladies and gentlemen, is near death experiencer Juan Escalante. Juan, welcome to the Real Spiritual Talk podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, no problem at all. I thank you for being a guest on the show. Now, Juan, before we get into your near death experience, I typically like to go backwards and ask if there was any previous religious or spiritual beliefs you may have held before having your near death experience.
Yes, I was raised Roman Catholic. As you can see by my Star of David, I am Jewish. I converted a year ago, but growing up, I was raised Roman Catholic, and around the age of 13, I basically had a crisis of faith, largely because of my sexuality, and from that moment on, I decided to label myself more spiritual, meaning that I didn't really subscribe anymore to a lot of the tenets of my Catholic upbringing, but I still believed in a God, and I was sort of more like I started to see it more as a one-on-one thing.
So, in other words, you had a personal experience, or rather, a personal relationship with spirituality.
Correct.
Gotcha. So, why don't we move into what it was that actually triggered your near death experience to occur? I understand it happened in New York, of all
Yeah.
places.
Yes, I know, right? This is well, so this happened on March 6th, 2022. I was 26 years old, and I was having this sort of very interesting state of mind, if you will, where I was in between being asleep and being awake. When you know that you aren't quite awake, meaning you couldn't move your body, but I also knew that I was actively conscious. I was still I was not within my unconscious mind, if that makes sense. I was sort of in this in between state where I knew that I was disconnecting from my body somehow, but also that I was not in a dream state. I was born prematurely because of an irregular heartbeat. um I was born at 8 months old, so which is not really, I guess, that early, but my mother went in for a scan, and the doctor said to her, this child has an irregular heartbeat. Sometimes I can hear him, and at other times I can't. And I had the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. So there are stories of children who, end up with the umbilical cord around their neck, and then they end up suffocating. So the doctors thought that, considering the irregular heartbeat and the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, that it was better that they, do a C-section, and, my mother went in for a scan, and she came out with a baby in hand. And I say this because when I had this experience on March 6th of 2022, what I remember after the experience was that when tried to come back into my body, I had a pain in my heart, a physical pain, and I remember feeling the difficulty of getting back into my body, um, because it felt as though my life force or my spirit was trying to get my body to wake up, and it was almost kind of like I could compare it to trying to start a car, and the motor just doesn't want to run, and you really try and try until you get it to run. So that, is a little bit of the preface of the experience, before I go into the meat and bones of it.
So, in other words, were you suffering some sort of medical issue while you were laying in bed this night that tied somehow back to your birth with the umbilical cord, or what do you say caused this particular experience to occur?
Well, I think that perhaps I was having some type of I don't know, I don't want to say heart attack, but some kind of, you know, malfunction, because even my mother, when I told her this story, said to me, I think that this may be related to, you know, the conditions of your birth. Um, I have noticed that I do struggle with very strong palpitations and anxiety, and I've had this since I was a child, but I never considered it something unusual.
So talk to us now about what you actually experienced when you, I guess, spiritually left your body.
So I think that I was reaching a place of incredible grief and pain. I think that I reached a state where I was feeling where I was reliving the childhood trauma of feeling unwanted by both of my parents. At the same time, also feeling the rejection of being gay, by my mother. Because a few years later, I actually did start living with my mother. And this was one of the contention points, my sexuality, that she has always struggled to accept. So you add all of that up and you add up, um, you know, the stresses of daily life, among other things. And I think that in that sort of vulnerable state that I was in, where I was falling asleep, but not quite asleep, there was a moment where I just started saying to myself, I can't do this anymore. Take me, just take me. I really can't do this anymore. Um, and then there was this voice with some sort of command, authority that said to me, just say thank you. And my entire life, it's the one precept I've always hung on to, right? The importance of being grateful. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, why am I nagging so much? I should just say thank you. I mean, I'm not the only person who's been through this. So I started saying thank you inside myself. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And by the third thank you, I began to feel this force, this gravity like force, but of the spirit, if you can think of that. It started to sort of like suck me into this, you know, some people call it a tunnel. I didn't see a tunnel, but if I could describe the motion, it would feel as if, you're being, sunk into this kind of like conduct that can feel like a tunnel. And it was this incredible force that I couldn't fight. It was just like this magnitude, this magnetism pulling my being into this place the moment I started saying thank you. And I remember that when I reached the end of that pool, or, when I reached the place that I was being pulled into, I try not to get emotional when I tell this, but it's almost impossible because what I remember in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt in my life. I remember feeling this incredible plenitude and gladness and joy and certainty of knowing that there was order in my life, in my existence, in the universe. It was as if you could take all of the positive emotions that you could feel and put them into one place together. And I just remember feeling like, wow, this is home. This is where I come from. This is truth. It, it was just this incredible knowing that this is where I came from, that this was somehow more real than this moment here right now. Like I can see my hand, I can touch it, I can smell it. But this was somehow more real than anything I had ever experienced. And there was no sense of time. There was only this incredible truth of unconditional love and order and, you know, knowing that this was home. And I didn't share this story for about 2 years. I only told my mother because obviously you become afraid that people are going to judge you. They're going to think you're losing it, whatever. But I told my mother because I knew that she would understand this on some level, right? Um, but back to the experience. So when I was in this place of incredible knowing and truth and order and love, there was a moment where I realized, oh, wait a minute. I think I'm dying. I think I'm crossing over. And it's very weird because it's not like a sequence of events, right? It's not like this happened and now this happens. It's sort of like as soon as you can think it, it's happening. It's very strange. I can't quite describe it. But what I mean by that is that the moment I realized, oh, I think if I stay here, I may not be able to go back. And in that moment, I remember feeling this incredible force that knew every single thought I'd ever had from the moment I was born, that knew every single feeling I had ever felt from the moment I had been born. This incredible nakedness where this entity that was everywhere, but I mean everywhere. I mean, there's no way to possibly describe this with words, but this force that was within me and outside of me, and that I couldn't possibly think a thought or anything without this force knowing what I was thinking or feeling. And it was this sort of nakedness where if you think about like, when a child is born and they're naked in this, room full of doctors, right? Or I was a nude model for a while, right? So I know what it's like to be physically naked in front of people. That if you were naked in front of 1,000 people, that would pale in comparison to what this felt like, because this was a nakedness of the soul. This was an entity, a force that could see right through me, and I couldn't hide no matter how hard I tried. It was like being an ant being put under a microscope and being observed to the most, basic atom, you know, like this, like if you put an ant under this incredible light being examined, that's what it felt like. I mean, it's funny when I hear people say that they can't wait to meet God. And I usually find this in common with other people who have had these experiences, which is that, I don't think most people really know what they're saying when they say that, because I think that I didn't exactly meet God, because I think if I had met God, I wouldn't have been able to come back. But just feeling the potency of this force, right? That was all knowing, that had no, I couldn't hide. I mean, I couldn't hide anything. I mean, this force knew everything that I had ever thought and felt, to the degree that it's almost unnerving as a human to think about anyone or anything knowing you on that level. And then I felt that I was about to get this rundown of my life, sort of like a movie, starting from my birth and my childhood. And in that moment, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I am about to be shown the trajectory of my life up until the final moment of consciousness. And I just remember thinking, no, I don't want to see this. I don't want to, you know, relive the beginning, of my life. I don't want to go through this emotion again. And as soon as I had that consciousness of I don't want to go through this life uh recap, was the moment that I was snapped out of it. And I remember then feeling my body, but not as me being inside of my body, but I remember feeling like the stillness somehow of my body, like this piece of meat just laying in bed, but not moving and somehow stiff. It was very strange. And I remember almost struggling to sort of like come back into my body and almost kind of having to push, you know, something, some force, to get myself to, you know, jumpstart this machine, if you will. And finally, when I was able to I guess jump back into my body, or pop back, if you will, I woke up and I remember feeling this tightness around my heart and just thinking to myself, "W- what just happened? What was this thing?" And, you know, this pain in my heart. And I tell you that to this day, I still don't understand what happened on a physiological level, but I do know that on that day, I connected to something, to a plane that was more real than anything I've ever experienced in my life.
Well, you're probably going to be left with a lot more questions than answers, especially until you finally get there permanently to probably receive all of these answers. But it sounds to me that what you described, especially being emotional, is what many near death experiencers go through. I've interviewed several people who shed tears, while being interviewed because the experience was so relivable. It was as if they were reliving it as they were retelling it, if that makes any sense. If I could just go backwards and ask a few follow-up questions, sounds as if this was triggered by some sort of aggressive heart palpitations, as you stated earlier. And it was here that you began to cross over and you heard a voice that was a commanding voice, and it just told you to be thankful. Because prior to this, you were thinking about all of the, I guess, the depressive moments of your life, the traumatic moments of your life, but for some reason, this voice told you to be thankful. Now, many near-death experiencers will say that this life is almost like a school. We have ups and we have downs, and you can't really judge it by the downs that you have, because those downs are what gives us the spiritual uh, evolution that the soul needs, so to speak. So, do you believe that this thank you was this voice telling you to say thank you was probably in connection with something similar to that?
I do. I do. Because as someone who was raised Roman Catholic, who converted to Judaism a year ago, I dabbled into Buddhism for a little bit in my early 20s. The one common thread I keep finding among different religious practices and spiritual practices is the importance of the precept of gratitude. So I have come to believe that um, gratitude is one of the strongest vibrations that we have as human beings to be able to connect to the higher power.
You then say that you felt a pulling force, and
Mhm.
this pulling force was pulling you into something similar to a tunnel, not necessarily a tunnel. You described how real all of this felt as well. You talked about how this felt more real than your earthly existence right now, as you're sitting where you are with me conducting this interview with you. You stated that there was absolutely you were absolutely overjoyed by the fact that there was so much order in the universe. For some reason, you got this knowledge that the universe was orderly and everything was as it was supposed to be, and you felt so much joy for this. This is also very common for many near-death experiencers. They may be going through hell in this earthly plane, but once they have this near-death experience, they could see the fires going on per se, but still understand that somehow it was how it was supposed to be. You know, it's kind of strange, but there's an order to the chaos, if you would.
It's 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 probably the most surreal thing to explain to others how in a world that seems to be so filled with grief and violence and just so much evil at times, there can be a certainty that there's actually an order to that. But I'll tell you that there is no language on earth to be able to understand or convey what this plane is like because it's not meant to be explained. It's meant to be felt. It's a place of consciousness. It's a place of you know it if you've been there. And I think on some level, every human being, in fact, I would say, I would go so far as to say that I know for a fact that all human beings are capable of reaching this place of unconditional love. And I think if every human being on earth could feel what this place felt like, we could easily treat each other with more respect, with more kindness. And not just us, but all living creatures.
The experience sounds very ineffable, meaning hard to describe, as you explained earlier. You also talked about there being no time, right? You were there, you were feeling, but it wasn't as if time was drifting or there was a clock in motion. Many near death experiencers say this as well. And it was here that you talk about a force that appeared that seemed to know all things. In fact, your soul was laid bare. You gave the analogy of being naked in front of spectators, and that paling in comparison to you being left open to this particular entity. Now, let me ask you: was this an entity of light, or how did this entity present itself to you?
This was a potency. I mean, of course, this was a place of unconditional love. It was a place of, you know, of complete knowing, um, where you knew that there was order in every single thing in the universe. I mean, everything, nothing was by mistake, nothing was by accident. And this entity, this force was like, it was an authority, but it was also beyond that.
Now, while you were in the presence of this entity, Did it communicate with you at all?
Well, I know some people say that they actually hear words and, some of them say they see things, but in my experience, what I carried away wasn't so much any particular words, or, anything I saw. I'll tell you what I can say I saw, okay? If there was a color that was present through this entire experience, it was not white, not beige, but this like bright light that was also the same thing, eh, where all of this unconditional love and eh, knowingness and truth was coming from. And what I mean by that is that this brightness, this because it's not a color, but I can only describe it as like white or beige. It's like, but this uh, emanation of light, um, I was part of this light. I wasn't disconnected from it. I was part of it. I came from this light, you know? Yeah, I was one with this light. I was part of this truth. I was part of this order. And I get chills thinking about it, remembering it.
So, indeed, once again, the experience is sounds very ineffable. At the same time, it feels like you're reliving everything that occurred to you. Now, I understand that they or this entity began in what's called a life review, but somehow you were able to cease that. You rejected the life review, and it was here that you returned back to your body. Why did you reject the life review?
So I know that oftentimes with people who have had near death experiences, they see their life in review and they often feel as though their work on earth isn't done. And that's why they choose to come back. In my case, I didn't need to see a live review of my 26 years of life on earth to know that I needed to come back. And it's funny because every time I revisit this experience, I remember something that I don't think about often in my waking life. And what I mean by that is that I usually have to start talking about this experience in order to remember more things that came to me. And actually, there is one phrase that I do remember hearing. I say hearing because you don't really, there's no sort of like hearing or seeing things as we see them and hear them here. But if you can describe it in this way. But there was one phrase that I actually remember, which was, I still have so much work to do. That was the one thing that I remember. That was probably the last thing I remember thinking, if you will, before coming back into my body. And it wasn't so much hearing or thinking, it was more like this sense inside of me of, oh no, like not yet. I know I have to go back. I know that there's still so much. The thing that is amazing to me is that it's as though the soul knows that there are things it must do, it must complete before leaving this earthly existence. And it's not like some kind of, oh, am I going to go back? mean, I'm not sure. The moment you feel this sense of responsibility, it snaps you back. There's no sort of, you know, hesitation. It's just the moment your soul knows or decides that it wants to, or the moment you become conscious that there's still more to be done, that's the moment that you are brought back. At least that's what I can say from my experience.
Yeah, and that sounds pretty common amongst many near-death experiencers. A lot of times they have a mission to go back to take care of their children. They have a mission to go back to repair a relationship, whatever the case may be. But here you do go back to your physical body and you wake up with a tightness in your chest. So it appears that something physiologically did happen to you due to those heart palpitations that may have brought on what can be described similarly as a heart attack or a pre-heart attack, whatever the case may be. Now, many near-death experiencers, when they come back from a near-death experience, and you sound like you are indeed touched by this, they come back changed. They come back with what we call after effects. Many may come back with the lack of fear of death. They may come back with heightened empathy levels. They may come back with some precognition, premonitions, etc. Did you come back with anything remotely close to these or something different about you since the experience?
I will say that I came back with confirmations. Um, I was a spiritual person before this happened, but I still had skepticism. And I would be lying if I said that there were moments where I questioned whether or not this was actually, if we were here just as this sort of like mistake or by chance. I know that the popular perception is that we exist as humans because of by chance, because because of the Big Bang, and then you know the molecules that formed into small creatures, and then from insects to animals, and then until we evolved from apes into social creatures. And I'm not saying that that isn't true. I'm not doubting the science of any of this, but do I think now that we are just these conscious beings on this planet in this huge universe, just we happened, and then we die and it's over? No.
You said that you were spiritual at the top of the show when we talked about religion. After this near death experience, however, you sounds like you found solace in the faith of Judaism. How did that come about? Was it aligned with your near death experience, or were there other reasons for you going the Judaic path?
So I think that everyone has I think everyone is born. I think everyone is born into whatever faith they're born into for a specific purpose. And it doesn't mean that you have to stay in that faith, right? We see this with so many people, right? Um, One of my biggest inspirations has been Tina Turner my entire life. She was born within the Christian faith, ended up, practicing Buddhism in her later years. But my belief is that this all-knowing force that we call God has ways of getting to us, to our consciousness, to recognizing that there is a God, that there is something beyond this plane of existence, that we are not alone. And I think that our souls and the contract that we make before we come into the world include all of this, meaning I was supposed to be born into a Roman Catholic family. I was supposed to dive into Buddhism, into Hinduism before reaching Judaism. And not because, other people who aren't Jewish are wrong, but because this is the path for my soul. Um, I believe that I was meant to be born to a single mother who would enter into a relationship while living abroad with a Jewish man that was then designed to bring us into Judaism.
Yeah, so it all goes back to the notion of a pre-birth plan of destinations where we shall end up, and ultimately finding God despite the belief system, and giving back to mankind, as you stated earlier, which is also the central mission that many near-death experiencers also talk about. Well, with that said, Juan, I want to thank you for coming on the Real Spiritual Talk podcast and sharing with us that absolutely fascinating and heartfelt near death experience account.
No, thank you. And, I'm happy that, others have come forward and, just all my love and blessings to you.
Once again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Juan Escalante.